Today we're going to talk about graphing quadratics in vertex form. We've already learned how to graph them in factored form and standard form, and vertex is the third and final form we're going to look at with quadratics. So vertex form is the form where y equals a times the quantity of x minus h squared plus k. And it's called vertex form because just by looking at the equation, we can figure out the vertex. So remember, our vertex is written as an ordered pair, x, y, and so from our vertex form, our x is always going to be h, and our y value is always going to be k. And so just by looking at the h and k from our equation, we are able to figure out the vertex. And then if we think about the vertex, well, if we know the vertex, we know the axis of symmetry, because the x value of the vertex is the same as the axis of symmetry. And so if we know x, that means x is equal to h. And that's how we can figure out the axis of symmetry and the vertex just by looking at the vertex form of our equation. The role of A is going to be the same as it was with our factored form and our standard form. So if A is positive, our graph is still going to open up. If A is negative, our graph is still going to open down. As A gets larger, our graph is going to get skinnier or more narrow. And as A gets smaller, our graph is going to get wider. So that part hasn't changed at all. So let's go ahead and practice, and we're just going to practice identifying h and k. So we want to write the equation of a parabola with the given vertex and a value. So looking at letter A, we have a equals 5, and then we have the vertex -1, 4. So remember, x is always our h value, and y is always our k value. So in order to write that equation, all we need to do is take our a, h, and k values and plug them into the correct spot on the equation. So instead of y equals a, we're going to have y equals 5 times x minus a -1, because we're going to plug in our h value. Then we square that according to the equation, and then we're going to add our k value, so we're going to add 4. Well, looking at this, notice that we have x, in our parentheses, we have x minus a -1. But what does minus a -1 really mean? That really means we're adding. So I'm going to switch this. So our equation for letter A is y equals 5 times the quantity of x plus 1 squared plus 4. And that's all we need to do. We're going to practice a couple more. So letter B, our h value is 2 and our k value is -3. So we'll have y equals 1 times x minus 2 squared, and then plus a -3 is really just subtracting 3. So you could write this as plus a -3, or you could just write -3. And that is our equation for letter B. It'd be a good idea to pause and see if you can write the equations for letter C and letter D. For letter C, you should get y equals 1/3 times x minus 0 squared plus 8, which you could also have written as y equals 1/3 times x squared plus 8, because x minus 0 is just x. And then for letter D, you should have gotten y equals -1 times x plus 7 squared. And then you don't need to add 0 at the end because that wouldn't change anything. Now, one really important thing I want you to notice as we're looking at this, notice that when we're looking at our h value, the sign for h flips. H was a -1, when it's in our equation, it's adding 1. H was a +2, when it's in our equation, it's a -2. H was a -7, when it's in our equation, it's a +7. So the sign for h flips, and notice that the sign for k stays the same. This was a +4, we were adding 4. This was a -3, we were subtracting 3. This was a +8, we were adding 8. So the sign for h flips, the sign for k stays the same. So keep that in mind. Now that we're a little bit more familiar with our vertex form, we are going to go ahead and graph. And in order to do that, we're just going to fill out the information on the side here and then put everything on our coordinate plane. So looking at this, we have an a value of 2, of +2, so we know our graph is going to open up. Well, our vertex, looking at our equation, our h value is going to be the opposite. So here we have a -1. Well, the opposite of -1 is +1. And our k value is going to stay the same. So k is just going to be a +3. So we have the vertex 1, 3. And our axis of symmetry, we just take that x value. So axis of symmetry is x equals 1. And then the table, this is the same table we used when we were graphing standard form, our x, y, ay table. So remember, we always use those same values for our x column and our y column. X is equal to x squared, right? We just square whatever our x value is. And then for our ay column, we take our a value, which in this case is 2, and we multiply it by our y column. So 0 times 2 is 0, 1 times 2 is 2, 4 times 2 is 8, 9 times 2 is 18, and 16 times 2 is 32. Remember, not all of these are going to fit on our graph, but we're going to put all of the ones that do fit on there. So we have all this information. Now we just need to put it on our coordinate plane. So our axis of symmetry is where x equals 1. Then our vertex is the point 1, 3. So I'm going to go to the right 1 and up 3. And now I can use my table. So remember, I don't care about my y column, but I'm going to go over the x amount. And since my ay values are positive, I'm going to go up my ay amount. So 0, 0 represents our vertex. So we need to go over 1 and up 2. Over 1, up 2. And then I'm going to mirror that point on the other side. And then we're going to go over 2 and up 8. Over 2, up 2, 4, 6, 8. And it looks like that is the last point that will fit. So we don't need to use the rest of the table. We just need to connect our points, and there's our graph. So that is how we graph vertex form. We're going to look at a couple more examples. It'd be a good idea to pause and see if what you can do on your own. Well, looking at this one, a is -1, so this is going to open down. And then for our vertex, remember the sign for h flips, the sign for k stays the same. So here we have h's, we're adding 5, and k we're adding 2, so h will be a -5, and k will be a +2. So our vertex is the point -5, 2, which means our axis of symmetry is the same as our h value, so it's just -5. Well, we already found our a value, which was -1, so we just need to take that y column and multiply it by our a value of -1. And that will give us 0, -1, -4, -9, -16. Remember to cross off the y column because after we use it to find the ay, we don't care about it anymore. So we're going to go over the x amount from our vertex, and since we have negative values, we are actually going to go down from our vertex. Well, our axis of symmetry is -5, so here's my -5. Our vertex is the point -5, 2, so I'm going to go to the left -5 and up 2. And now we can use our table. So we want to go over 1, down 1, over 1, down 1 on both sides. Remember, you need to mirror your points. Then we're going to go over 2 and down 4 and mirror that, or go over 2 and down 4 on both sides. We can keep going because we have more room on our graph. So now we're going to go over 3 and down 9. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. Here's my down 9, and then I do the same on the left side. Over 4, down 16. Well, that's not going to quite fit on our graph, so I will connect my points. And here is our parabola. We're going to look at one more example. Again, it'd be a good idea to pause and see if you can do this for yourself. So looking at it, we have an a value of -2. So this is going to open down. Then for our vertex, well, here's our h, here's our k. The opposite of -4 is a +4, and k is going to stay the same, so it'll be a +1. So we have the vertex 4, +1. Our axis of symmetry is just that h value, so x is equal to 4. And then for our table, well, our a value we already found. We said it was -2, so we're going to multiply our y column by -2. So 0 times -2 is 0, -2, -8, -18, -32. And again, cross off that y column because we're done with it. We're going to go over the x amount, and since these are negative ay values, we are going to go down that amount from our vertex. Well, now we can graph it. So again, it'd be a good idea to pause and try and graph it and then compare. So our axis of symmetry is 4. Here's our axis of symmetry. Our vertex is the point 4, 1. So we're going to go to the right 4 and up 1. Okay. And then we're going to go over 1 and down 2 on both sides. Then we need to go over 2 and down 8. So over 2, down 2, 4, 6, 8. on both sides. And then down over 3 and down 18, that's not going to fit on our graph, so we can just connect our points, and there is our parabola. That is how we graph a parabola in vertex form. Important things to remember: h is opposite for the vertex, right? So the sign for h is opposite, the sign for k stays the same. Your axis of symmetry is just the same as your h value of your vertex. And remember that that roll of A has not changed at all. That is exactly